All right. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Complexity Lounge, a meetup where we gather to talk about all things related to complexity and complex adaptive systems. I'm Jocko Selberg, and somewhere out there calculating her flow is the indomitable number crunching Barbara Frontera, and together we co-host the lounge. Before we kick it off, just a few ground rules. We will be recording today's session, so if you do not wish to be recorded, please make sure your camera and microphone are turned off. After Troy's talk, we'll have a question and answer period and hopefully a nice conversation with all of you. So gather up questions, and should you have a question or comment, you can either raise your hand, your Zoom hand, or just send your question directly to Barbara via the chat with a big Q in front, and she will probably just ask you to read it out for yourself. As Barbara said, the recording will be posted to Vimeo on our Complexity Lounge page in the next few days, and that is where you'll find all of our other past videos from the lounge. Today, we are welcoming to the lounge Troy Magennis. Troy is an esteemed technology executive and consultant with a rich career spanning over 3 decades in the software industry, known for his influential work at Focused Objective LLC, which is a leading quantitative analysis and forecasting vendor. Troy has made significant contributions to Agile predictability metrics and probabilistic forecasting.
That's why you don't ask ChatGPT to write your background and bio.
I tried to clean it up.
Thank you.
Troy will give us an introduction to the physics behind how long things take and how likely things are to be delivered, and offer ways to talk to executives and teams about the consequences of small decisions in complex systems. So Troy Magennis, welcome to the Complexity Lounge.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. And yes, so today the session it's going to be a list of things that in the past I've tried to teach and talk to people about and just had them sort of glaze over. So good luck on making it through sort of this session. I don't have slides. I've got a lot of, well, if you know me, I've got a lot of spreadsheets. I've got a lot of articles and about trying to get people to understand that that being complex is okay, that being difficult is actually good, and that sometimes that's where we're going to sort of find the most value. Unfortunately, I think in my industry of the software sort of world, we sort of shy away from sort of hard answers to questions. And I found a video which really explained my feeling of how the world is dealing with simplicity and complexity as a whole. So I want to play that for you now. And as soon as sorry, one sec.
You gotta keep it simple. Life is like a song. There are tunes that folk are used to, so if you want them to sing along, just keep it simple. You ought to play it safe. Life is just a game. People like the rules as written, so just give them more of the same. No one likes a smart ass. No one likes it complicated. If you want to go the distance, find the path of least resistance and just take it. You don't want to stick your neck out. You don't want to stick your neck out. They'll take your head off if you do. They're gonna rip your head off. Just sit up the back and judge others. Hey, sit down. It'll keep them from judging you. If you're too hard to stomach, you'll never amount to nothing. Ain't that something? No one cares what you have to say. Just shut up and play the role you're casting.
All the world's a stage.
You see, all the world's a stage.
And all the men and women merely
So just say the lines you're given exactly as they're written, and for God's sake, act your age. No one likes a show-off. No one likes a clown. Just make sure you don't stand out in the crowd. That way they can't cut you down. You gotta build your walls around you. You beld them straight and make them square. That way you'll blend in with the background. That way no one will point and stare.
It does nothing for the average Australian. No one cares about the arts. No one cares about architecture.
It is a waste of taxpayer dollars.
It is a failure.
You gotta stick to your convictions. You gotta nail down your views.
Nail 'em down.
You wanna steer clear of the discomfort you feel when you walk in another person's shoes.
You don't need that.
You gotta work out who your team is, then wear the badge with pride. Find a box that makes you comfortable and then stay the heck inside. On the first day the Lord gave you television. On the next he delivered a couch. He delivered. Tell me how to explain all this content. If the universe wanted you out and about, toe the line, don your suit, hide your truth, wipe your tears. Don't cause trouble, find your bubble, stick to black and white ideas. Play it safe, know your place, know your lines, know your limits. Find a doctrine, get it locked in, build a box and stay in it. Toe the line, don your suit, hide your truth, wipe your tears. Don't cause trouble, find your bubble, stick to black and white ideas. Play it safe, keep it beige, keep it simple and same-ish. Leave the weird ideas to the Danish. You gotta play it safe. Your mind is like a house. If you keep it locked up tight, you just might keep the world out.
So if that doesn't describe our industry, I don't know what does. I think that what we have there is sort of the Sydney Opera House's 50th anniversary, which is this year, and at the time it was completely derided as being, it was hard to build, it was over budget, it wasn't right. But there was a certain amount of complexity in building a building that shape on sort of reclaimed land over an ocean, so you couldn't really use sort of cranes. They had to be floating cranes on the water and so forth. And yet it turned out pretty well. And I think that that's Tim Mitchell. Do not Google his other videos if you're in a workplace. So it is not something that you want to be a bit aware of. But that one, he limited the swearing and he limited the nudity, so it was all well and good. But I've certainly felt in my sort of 25 years in the software industry, especially when Agile came along, that people jumped into really sort of simplistic answers. And it wasn't always that way. I mean, I went to grab this book. I don't know if anyone, let's see if I can get that. It's probably back to front for you, but Metrics and Models in Software Quality Engineering. I mean, this book goes back to last century. I mean, this is the second edition and the seventh printing of it, and it was sort of 2017. But it had a lot of stuff in it that our industry has just forgotten. It's just not taught anymore. It's just not used anymore. And I think, we went down the pathway of, how can we just sort of simplistically teach people? So what I want to sort of do today is try and show you some more of the complex sort of areas of why some things go pear-shaped in sort of planning and forecasting and using data in the software world. So anyway, with that sort of introduction, is it okay to start? All right, good. And I'll stick with the Australian theme for a moment. Now, one of the things in that book I just showed was how to estimate how many defects remain in software. And this stuff is sort of really well-known science. It's used in biology, it's used everywhere. But I wonder, whenever I go into organizations and they're trying to understand sort of whether their testing is being effective or whether, 100%, investing in 100% code coverage and sort of integration testing coverage is worth doing or not. And I'm sort of saying, well, how many sort of defects are yet to be found? And they look at me and say, well, how would we ever know that, Troy? And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, it's sort of, here's a purchase order. Give me a shot at it, right? And it comes out of this book, and it is incredibly simple math, but people don't understand how sampling works, how statistics works, to how much data you need to get a bit more insight into something you have absolutely no idea about. So they're willing to go down the pathway of having no information at all, versus sort of using a little bit, even a couple of samples of data to get at least a guiding indicator of where some number may be. And that's exactly what we sort of do in this world. So this is how estimating sort of the number of remaining defects sort of goes. And, so you're tasked with estimating how many fish there are in a pond. And no, this is not a dating metaphor. It's sort of just imagine the biology. You're being given the task of going out and understanding how many fish there are in a big pond. And you can't kill them, because, I mean, that would be easy, wouldn't it? Just sort of poison the water, they float to the surface, and then you can just count them. That's not allowed in this century. That was outlawed a few years ago. So you can't see them and you can't kill them. So how are you going to estimate how many there are? Well, the process is called capture-recapture. We go off and we go fishing. What a great life. We go out and out of the total number of fish there are, we catch 5 fish and we gently and lovingly tag them. I don't know, we may take photos of them. We may sort of put a little sort of tag on their tail, and then we throw them back in. And that's the important part, throwing them back in. We go over beer. I said this is going to be an Australian theme talk, but we go over beer because you need some time to pass. You need some time for those fish to intermingle with all their colleagues. And when you go back, you go fishing again. Now, the ratio of the number of tagged fish, which is a known amount, and the number of new fish, which are untagged, gives you insight into how many total fish there are. And you sort of say, whoa, you've been drinking, Troy, and I have. It's early, and I'm allowed. But how does that sort of work? Well, the formula goes, if you understand the total fish that you caught the first time, and you know that because you caught them and tagged them, and the total fish caught the second time, the ratio of those two will actually give you how many fish there are in total in the pond. And I know that sounds crazy, but think about it, right? If you tested something and then you got a different set of person to come back and test, if they only found this exactly and only found the exact defects that you found, then chances are you've got a pretty good test coverage because they didn't find a lot of new defects. But if they found 5 new defects that you did not find, you now know that there are probably many defects in there, because both times you went and looked, you got the Venn diagrams did not mesh. You got a completely different set of data. So the same holds true when we're looking for anything inside our software, or we're trying to understand something about our software, is that just a few samples, especially done by a different set of people, can tell you information that you otherwise wouldn't have had. Because if there's no Venn diagram crossing, then you know there's a heap left to find. If they somewhat cross, there's some more. If there's exact duplication, then I reckon you found most of them. And that's sort of the way I think we can do it with defects. Spend some time with a group of people, split your number of people into 2, or do it at 2 different times, and get them to sort of go and sort of say, group A, go and find all the problems with this form or with this page or with this sheet, and then you'll get a list of defects they find. And do the same thing with group number 2. And using this sort of formula I sort of showed you at the top of the page there, in some very simple math. I mean, it's multiplication and division, hard for some people, but with calculators and ChatGPT, I'm sure we all work out how to get this right. And what it will tell you is a rough estimate of how many undiscovered defects there are. Now, back in the 80s and 90s when I was sort of coding, this was very commonplace. everyone did sort of capture, recapture sort of defect testing. Sure, we had gates, so we were focused on testing when we were doing it. But once we sort of blended testing throughout the whole lot and we sort of said, let's stay releasable all the time, we forgot these simple techniques for understanding how to do it. Now, you'll get sort of links to this, but, you know, the math was, even given division, was too hard for people. So, you know, what I did was I found a, you know, I just created a spreadsheet where you can put all your defects in and say whether group A or group B found it, yes or no. And it just tells you how many undiscovered defects there are, just based on sort of that ratio sort of stuff. And I mean, it is very, very simple sort of math there. You know, total defects minus, you know, total estimated defects minus total defects, you know, it's all very, very simple stuff of just counting. So this is an example where even one or two samples, just spending 15 minutes in doing this stuff, you will get a very good sort of a very good outcome. Any comments or questions? Anyone doing this? Anyone using this technique at all? Don't see the chat window. Sorry, I've got to get my little chat window back open. Ah, no. Oh, there we are. See it there. No, never used it. Sounds fun. Yeah, I mean, so basically what you're doing, and you can do this with anything, is what's important is there are two, the people have to be, you have to look at two different times. You can't use the same people because they'll be predefined. You're finding duplication of what they have. Whereas with fishing, I mean, you're fishing and you're finding and you're catching fish. There's no way you could sort of catch another fish in preference to another. But whenever you're looking at sort of understanding stuff in the knowledge world, they have to be separate groups of people looking, and they can do it at the same time even. So the idea would be is get everyone to bug bash and then just start sort of putting them into groups based on A to K on the surname, or, you know, L to Z on the surname, something like that. So you're just sort of helping them find it. So I mean, it's a very simple technique, but it shows you that even with a very small amount of data, you can get a very big value of something you had no clue about, because there's no way you could sort of estimate the undiscovered defects by, you know, I guess you do it by politics now. No, there are no defects, it's perfect, but that doesn't always work out. I don't know. On the complexity scale, does this rate at all? Probably not. All right. Now, where do I go from here? I think I will go to... Let me just sort of see if I have one here. Yeah, this one. So a while ago, I put up a free sort of set of training on one of my websites there. It's just a video set. And what it was me just recording some questions which I was asked a lot about, sort of on topics by executives, or fights I had with executives, or anyone like that, about you know, when I could sort of see a problem, but I had to convince them of something else, and there was math behind it. And I realized that you know, sort of doing like this, group discussions of mathematics just led to premature ending of consulting engagements. So as I'm not being paid here, we're probably going to last the hour, but that's pretty much how long I last in the workplace if I ever bring up math. So first question I always get is utilization. What's the impact on lead time as I sort of try and make sure all my developers are fully utilized? And it's sort of a big sort of area. And this is the way I sort of try and teach it, is that, especially on the predictability end, because I get called in by these executives sort of saying, we can't forecast, can you run some training? Or we can't estimate, our developers are terrible at estimating how long things are going to take. Well, the point is if you're in a traffic jam with no movement, no flow in which to extrapolate how long something is going to take, how could you estimate how long it's going to take? So even though the smug fellow in the yellow shirt is on a bicycle rather than a powered vehicle, he can predict how long it's going to take him to travel a mile faster than the poor sods on the right-hand side or the left-hand side. I don't know if the screen's reversed, right? But we need a couple of things to be predictable and to be able to understand how long something's going to take. And one of them is movement. And the problem is as utilization gets higher, movement gets slower for any one item. You tend to be sort of cherry picking around. So individual things move a little bit, but they're stopping and starting. And that's not sort of enough signal of flow to be able to extrapolate out how long something's going to take. So when people want predictability, what you really need as a precursor to that is some concept of flow. And the first thing that really impacts flow is congestion, and which we call sort of utilization, but it's sort of congestion. So from a predictability perspective, if you want to be predictable, then you have to keep the work flowing and start limiting the amount of time people spend in complete traffic jams. Because on that side, it's a percentage of time not moving, which is the best predictor of how long. And on this side, it's a percentage of time moving that's a better predictor of how long. So they're both, you can forecast both of them, but on the traffic jam side, what we're really guessing is how long people are going to spend not moving. And on the bottom side, we're predicting the time that people spend moving. Which one do you think is the better predictor for the software product development industry? Traffic or bike? You put it in the chat window. Traffic or bike? Which one do you think we spend most of our time living in? Yep. Ian's got it. Sort of the traffic side, right? So that means when all of our make the developers estimate, make the developers and let's break down the work and let's do some more story and task breakdowns. That would only be useful as a predictor if we were on the left, if we were on the bike. So what we really have a problem with in our industry is estimating the time that things aren't going to move and maybe minimizing or controlling that. So we have it completely reversed. And it's because it's really hard to sort of our doctrine that we've locked in says that it's all about estimation and summing up work and projecting it out, and that's what we shall do. So does waiting time grow as utilization grows? Does having a faster bike or car matter if you're in congestion? Does the consistency of the time moving matter? These are type of questions which are very well known in other industries that we haven't sort of really gone into. And it's sort of called Kingman's estimation is what this is known as in the queuing world or the queuing theory world. And it looks ominous, doesn't it? I mean, it looks like, it's got these weird symbols in it. And all that means on the left there is that this isn't precise, it's an estimate. So don't go sort of placing all of your money on this. But then there's some sort of weird stuff in it, and we don't really need to know about it. The only thing we need to know is that whenever things have an exponential on them, or in this case they're squared, that's going to play a big role in the number because adding makes numbers bigger, multiplication makes numbers bigger faster, exponentials make numbers bigger even faster than that, right? So you don't need to understand the formula, but what I want you to look at here is two numbers, which is the variation of arrivals and the variation of how long it takes to do that work in our world. And the interesting point is that addition is simple, because what it sort of says is how much sort of utilization we have, and this part here represents utilization, and this part represents the variability. And the thing is that these two are just completely added together. And in the Agile world, we make an art form of trying to reduce the variability of cycle time, of how long things take to do. And we almost pay no attention to the variation of making sure that work arrives into the system at a very consistent pace. Because if all those cars turn up at peak hour, that has a much larger impact as if the same number of cars turned up on the road over a full 24 hours. So this should be this is something we can learn from without even understanding how the formula works. We know there are two forms of variability, and they both have exactly the same impact. But in our world, we focus on just one in dominance, the service time variability. So I think that's the last slide of that. We don't need to understand any of this. Yeah. All right. Kind of switch out. I'm going to go over to some I think I'm here. Let me just get out of that one. I have a whole heap of these little observable notebooks. I'll put them in the chat window there if I can. They're my workings, and what this is all about is it lets you do an article, and then it lets you sort of have some interactivity with the articles. So all these articles explain how does utilization impact lead time, and then I explain what it's all about. And there are 4 variabilities: the average cycle time of something, say it's 5 days; the system utilization, it's sort of I say 80% utilization, and I give you 2 of the variabilities: the cycle time variability and the arrival rate variability. And what it does there, of course, is as you change the numbers, it sort of shows you what it's about. And the thing is as we sort of go up in utilization, you'll see that the queuing time gets very large very quickly, especially up around these 95, 96, 97s. You'll see that it balloons a lot. And I think there's a better way of looking at it down here. If we say the average thing takes 25 days, for instance, now as we sort of, this is how long it takes to do, 25 days to do the work. That's the average cycle time. So that's the blue line. And this is utilization along this axis. And this is time. This is the number of total days it took to do the work. And as I increase the variability, which is just both of those factors together, you'll sort of see that the proportion which is delay grows massively. It gets very, very large, very, very quickly. And that's what we're trying to avoid, ideally, is that it's only really the last sort of 10 or 20% where we pay an extraordinarily out of huge sort of out of proportion sort of impact of it. Now, what I've found in explaining this to people is that putting it in time doesn't punch people in the gut enough for them to understand the dumbass thing they're doing about trying to keep everyone 100% utilized. So whenever you're making an argument around these mathy stuff, you still have to put it into a dollar value to get attention. So that was version 1 of this. And version 2 of trying to explain to executives what utilization is all about is turning it into an economic argument about how long things are going to take to do. And what I do here, of course, is I sort of say, well, let's say it takes 5 days to do, and every day that we're late delivering is worth $1,000. What's the system variability? None, a little, moderate, lots. I mean, if you're in an inventive world, it's sort of lots. Let's just stick with moderate for the moment, because I'll make my point quite clearly, right? As I increase the utilization from 80%, start looking at the cost of queuing. So this is the time I'm paying for work not moving based on other people doing other stuff at the same time. And you'll sort of see it gets astronomical, $121,000. And that's just $1,000 a day, because it's 121 days that things are stuck, queued, waiting. So if there was something that we needed to manage in our world which had the best economic impact in high utilization systems, it should be utilization. We shouldn't be managing for flow of work. We should be managing to keep utilization at a very consistent sort of low point. Jocko.
Well, you're right on it there. I was just going to mention, I think your chat window is covering up part of the the visuals. So you might slide that
Is that
off.
gone?
Sure. Yep.
Oh,
Yep,
okay.
it's
I
good.
didn't think it did
Thanks.
that. My mistake.
Yep.
Yeah, anyway. So I need to start from the beginning? Go back to the video? No. But yeah, so the point is that it is actually the cost of queuing, which is the predominant cost in our industry. And I don't see it being talked about. I see, we talk about sort of WIP limits and stuff like that. It's a backdoor way of managing utilization, but we certainly plan our portfolios trying to stuff as much into a quarter as we can. I see a lot of sprint planning sort of working out. I don't see people using historical data to work out what they should do and then backing it off slightly so that they can make sure that work gets done. It's quite a yeah. It's not so. It's just not discussed. Yeah. All right. So this is what we call Kingsman's formula. I try and explain to people about sort of what's the target cost of delay, what should it be, because I just set that at 1,000. But you got to teach people about what that sort of means. But there's a lot of there's a lot of. Let me just go back to this one for 1 second to see if I have a better chart there. I think I do. Yeah. You'll sort of, I think I showed that one. I have a lot of what you can do about it here, and what you should observe is that there are two types of variability: cycle time and arrival rate. And I think sort of it's the arrival rate variability that we don't really sort of work on, and we sort of don't understand when utilization doesn't matter. Because if I went back to the slides there, in this case over here, where the fellow's on the bicycle, that's very low utilization. That's too low, because that's one person commuting on that. I mean, we need to start going to riding more bicycles. I mean, this is this isn't a European country because there are no bikes on the road. But get the point is that utilization doesn't always matter. But if we're trying and we're intentionally trying to do more work than we have people, and we know that because we have a backlog of things to do, that's your indicator that, well, everyone's busy doing other stuff. The rate we allow people to start work is really going to be the most important factor in understanding how long things are going to take. Because if we put too much in, we bring the system to congestion collapse, and we have no way of measuring flow to forecast. And that's sort of point number one, is that it's very difficult to do. Yeah, the Heathrow Airport. Greg said he used the Heathrow Airport. They understand objectives and facts and data. Yeah, understand. So what the pushback I get on this is that we don't have this sort of situation. I don't believe that it grows that fast, and I think you can see it. What I sort of tend to do is I look at throughput until there's a couple of people away on vacation, and I think it's worth me finding a deck on that. Let me just find something here.
I'd also like to say that if anyone has any questions about the actual math or comments on what Troy is talking about, please do sort of pipe up. Because I think we're looking for sort of a conversational aspect to this as well.
Yeah, jump in.
So Troy, can I just jump in and say I absolutely love this, and this is kind of like my favorite stuff, because I think the bit that people don't realize is that they think that by starting lots of stuff at the same time means, and flooding the system means, they've got more chance of getting it sooner. And what they lose by doing that is predictability. Whereas keeping it in the queue before the system means you can now actually, as you say, in the case of the guy on the left on the push bike,
on the bikes,
you can actually predict how long that will take. And if you can keep stuff off the motorway, you can predict how long it will take. When it's all jammed in there, you can't predict it at all. And so the big mistake, the big frustration I see is actually the people who understand this are the engineers. And they try and teach this to senior management. But what they don't do is really focus on telling the product owners, who are actually the ones who are flooding the system, to start holding stuff off and to coordinate with each other rather than just flood the system.
Yeah, got it. And so we need to be dramatic about it, right? And this is, Chris, this is a shared client. You were with me when we did this, right? This was a company which had 100 teams, and this was the growing sort of throughput that the teams were doing. So 400 stories per week for 100 teams. And then you can sort of see right about the middle of the year, at the end of the year, you'll sort of see these huge drop-offs. And it's not like there was a huge burst of activity once everyone come back to work. But what do you think caused this? What caused these complete decimation of any flow, of any delivery of work, of any of those 100 teams?
Code freeze.
No, it's a HR policy. It was if you don't use your annual leave by the end of the year, you lose it. And you sort of say, well, surely not everyone goes off work, like 100 teams, 7 plus or minus 2, because it must be, right? That's the doctrine, 7 plus or minus 2, so that must be 700 people. Where did they all go? Why did throughput sort of crater for those periods of time? Well, it didn't need any more than 3 or 4% of people to take annual leave at the same time to put you into higher congestion for the remaining people that completely decimated any movement at all. So this is congestion collapse in the real world, and it is just a huge cost. What's the cost of carrying 700 minus maybe 15 people? What's the salary that you're paying for them for a month and getting zero delivery during that period of time? And that's in the very high tens of millions of dollars. I mean, and it's because you didn't want to carry over the annual leave, because that's a few $100,000s worth of dollars that we don't want to carry over year to year. So you're paying this $20 to $30 million cost to offset a $500,000 sort of carryover of annual leave. Or you could fix it with a really simple fix of sort of saying, let's just make it your annual leave expires on the date of your hire, not at exactly one calendar day every year, because that's how HR wants it, right? So this very simplistic HR policy causes this devastating impact. And how hard was it to make this sell? I mean, you produce this chart and you show them, and they just sort of go, wow, okay. How do we change the policy? So there will be, if you plot your throughput data, you will see these cratering impacts. And it's not because you have bad people, it's because what you've done is you've gone from 85% utilization to 95% utilization or something like that. And it doesn't take a lot of people out of the system to cause this to occur. And you know this intuitively on your teams. If you have a team and you have 1 or 2 people away at the same time, it really has a large impact on the team flow. Well, it happens at large scale organizations as well. And
sorry, Greg had an interesting comment in the chat. Greg, would you unmute and repeat that to Troy and start, discuss?
Troy, it was the obvious question. So if what level of utilization probably makes sense given the typical variability you see in a process, because traditionally from a queuing point of view, what we say is if it goes beyond 70%, it tends towards infinity.
Yeah, so the way I look at this is it depends on the consequences of not being able to service what's next. So if you can be in complete control of the arrival rate of the work, then you can absolutely go to a higher utilization. But say you were an ambulance service or a hospital emergency room or something like that, right? You would want to intentionally keep half the beds free or make sure that you had enough crews of ambulances to attend if another accident occurs somewhere else. So you would want to have lower utilization. So if you can control arrival rate, and if your cycle times are very consistent, then you could go up to 80-85% without paying a very high price at all. But if you can't control the service rate, and if you can't control the rate or when urgent work is going to come along, then you maybe want to go down to 50 or 40% to make sure that the cost of not being able to service something urgent is available. So I don't think there's any fixed number. It's a really good conversation to have with people to tell them there are no simple answers here on this stuff. I can't give you a percentage, but you've got to tell me the consequences of delay should it go exponential, as you say.
Well, one of the heuristics I use for that is I'll say 80%, simply because when you're talking to executives, if you use a number lower than that, they will not believe you. Once we can get them at 80%, and then we start to bring it down to a more realistic number. And of course, that's going to be contextual. But at least a generic starting point is 80%. The real one is closer to 60 to 70, generally.
Yeah. In the example that Troy and I worked together, we actually took it down to 50%. But the reason is we had the data that showed that even though the teams were delivering 67% of their own work, overall, the end-to-end value streams that were the investments which involved multiple teams, only 2% was being delivered. So we reduced it at that higher level because we knew that the teams would have other stuff to do anyway, like bug fixes and could pay down technical debt or whatever. But we reduced the work going into the system to 50% of the perceived capacity, and that resulted in a 1,500% increase in productivity. So exactly what Troy's showing you here.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the point. Is I agree. Give them a number 80% because they're going to want to let people feel they'd rather be wrong than uncertain. So giving them some certainty around 80%, you're probably going to help the organization by getting them down from 100. And so I'm absolutely with you there. And so I mean, it's as Patrick is saying there, is not all staff are equal, and you can overutilize a particular skill set very quickly, even if you don't overutilize a whole team. So it requires having redundancy in your teams and the skill sets those people have as well. So yeah, managing skills and what people have and making sure you have more than one of them is a no-brainer, but we don't apply that at an organizational level, and we don't understand the cost of it. So that's all I'm getting to.
But it also plays into what I talk about. I'm sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, so optionality on the supply side, but also optionality on the demand side. And if you think about it, idle time is taboo in most organizations.
Yeah.
Period. And so working on your liquidity is way more feasible than discussing capacity utilization.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I sort of try and get them to sort of saying you can go for whatever utilization you want, even 100%, but there has to be 40% of that work which is sacrificable. So in other words, we would intentionally bump that work if something more important come along. So I find that the step of getting them to, so I let them plan to 100%, but I make them pick the first 30%, which can be dropped off, which can be removed and deferred. So I make them, it's like sort of saying which pocket you're going to drop the ball in snooker. I make them sort of tell me in advance which work they're going to sacrifice when something more important comes along, and how they're going to tell that something more important is there.
Well, there's also a little bit of a problem with the definition of idle time, right? They think that idle time is going off and playing video games or something like that. Yeah. Whereas actually, it's critical work. It's just not something that is easily visible as sort of dark work.
But what you're often talking about here is their obsession with managing their people rather than the work.
Yep.
In other words, the focus is always on making sure that the teams are working and being seen to be working, as opposed to the main focus being on the flow of the work and this is to Patrick's point and what's some of what Chris was saying. But when the management philosophy is often about managing, and they'll talk about managing the work, but what they're really focused on is managing the people and the actors in the system and making sure they are performing to a certain level. And Tiani has her hand raised. Tiani?
Hi. I'm working with or trying to help someone on a client project that basically it's with the CDC, in fact, and they have a lack of control over the rate at which how much of their work arrives. They have lots of urgent fire drill requests from the C-suite, from the White House, from everyone, and that makes it very difficult for them to do the actual mission work and then implementing on the ground type things that the project work that they've scoped out for themselves. And so the question they had was how to calculate that financial impact when it's public sector without P&L, and then if I'm not sure what workflow tools they have, if there's any consistency there. So my question is, like, if you've run into a case, like, what kind of data do you look for and do you pull? Because a lot of times there's all kinds of data collected. They're data rich, but information poor. But if you dig, you can sometimes find things you can use to then weave that story together so that they can understand what's going on.
Yeah, it could be hard, especially like if you go in to these companies and you only have like an hour or two with the executive, you don't even have time to get that sort of data. I find that they can. I try and get them to recollect a story. When was the last huge disaster where something took sort of 10 times longer than it should have been? And they can always give you one. So I tend to get them to recollect that one, and then I go and ask the team on that one what was happening at that period of time, and they would sort of tell me, oh, that's when we got this sort of production outage, and we had to stop work on that to do something else. So I try and find the story of a shared disaster that they all lived through. And then at least it narrows in on the data that I need to do. I'm in a project or I'm in a team, and I can ask that team, why did that have such a devastating impact that you had to work on production? Oh, well, it required restoring the database, and we only use this other team to do our database work. Ah, that's interesting. So let me go and ask that team, why could you not do the original work and that work? Oh, we only have that was during when we were trying to hire a second person. I was here by myself, right? So then I can sort of say the utilization of this one person got beyond what was necessary, and that caused this 10x blowout delay down here on this other product. So I try and connect the dots back to a constraint I find, and then sort of saying, from your staff liquidity perspective, maybe where else is that right now? If that happened today, where would your constraint be? And I make them solve that problem. And there's the saying, but we brought you in to diagnose what the cause was. Yeah, I did. But your next cause is going to be not having a React developer or an AWS operations person or something random like that, or access to legal to write a privacy agreement. So I stay away from the data in these very short engagements because you only have attention span to get. So what they sort of say in sales is hurt and help. So I gotta make them remember a 10x delay first and make them feel the pain, and then there's a small chance they're going to listen to.
If only you had data on their attention span, you might be able to make some progress.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, Chris Matz has raised his hand. We're in trouble now. All right, Chris.
And just to once again, Chris, I mean, I think that the key point that Troy's making, I think I see that what Troy's talking about of reducing limiting work in progress to about 50%. So that you can get the work flowing through. But once you get the work flowing through, the key point, I think, one of the key points that Troy's making is, once you do that, you can start to predict how long things will take in the system when they're in the system. It also means you can start to predict how long things are going to sit in the queue before they get to be processed and then done. You can't do this with a system that's too much WIP. But that means that you can start to use cost of delay. So if you're at the CDC, you might say, well, okay, so as a result of keeping the utilization at 50%, we can now predict how long things will take. This means things are going to sit in the queue for this long before we actually start working on them. And that's where you justify the investment in extra capacity so that you can go faster. Yeah, rather than the general political approach, which is just to try and jam more paper into the photocopy machine, as Tony Grout used to say. Just because you're shoving the paper into the photocopy machine doesn't make it come out any faster at the other end.
Yeah, you can also begin. Yeah, you can also begin to move up that stack where you're tackling things on the portfolio level, right? And start to operate your whip at a higher level because you've started somewhere limiting your throughput to something that you can work up to, because that at the team level is just a symptom. The problem is the work being flooded up on the portfolio level, and that ties into strategy and all these other investments and all these other things.
You got to come back to the variability point, Chris, because that works well when you've actually got the variability under control. You've got the granularity, and the challenge of it's the point is if the organization's immature and everything's novel, then I just have you've got to basically get them to just do some simple practice stuff first, and once you got over that, you take them on the journey. Then you can start thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, and I'm okay with anything sitting idle as long as I get to choose what it is. And I think that's sort of with the executives, I sort of let them sort of say maybe step one is helping you be able to drive and guide what's sitting idle versus what's moving, and that's sort of I get to do something good. Us white cisgendered elderly males get to make our mark as usual, and so that's the. That's what
I think there's this thing about idle that we need to kill as an idea, because no one ever sits there idle. What it is, it's the committed deliverables that become the problem. Yeah, because if you've got committed deliverables and that they need to get done, and then when you're sitting idle, that's your opportunity to grow skills so that you've got more skill liquidity. That's your opportunity to pay down technical debt so that you can go faster. That's the opportunity to improve your tooling. What we tend to find is that everyone is 100% busy on committed deliverables and someone's pushing them to get it done, which means they can't respond quickly enough. So you're never going to find people sitting around doing nothing, but it's a case of taking the pressure off so that they can focus on the right things rather than be flooded with demand from lots of different directions.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. Now I have a couple more. I want to do the next couple. I've got three, so that was the first one, and I think this is another one I have. Amdahl's law. Now it comes down to parallel processes for CPUs, but I mean, what are people other than just parallel CPUs? And the point of this one is that I often sort of see, well, good, okay, so tell me what to hire, and I will hire them and improve sort of flow, and the sort of illusion that doubling the people will double the flow of anything, or quadrupling the people will make it 4 times faster. And that's not true. We actually have a formula for that as well, which talks about how long something is going to sit waiting, latency again. Latency in this case is the speed up of how much faster you're going to get by adding people, which is sort of the inverse of that. And you only have 2 sort of inputs to it. You have the proportion of time that something is going to be parallel. In other words, what proportion of the time could these 2 resources work completely independently? And if there's, if they're 100% sort of independent, then we would expect to get, for 2 people, we get 2 times the input. Yep. So, we're going to go on for a bit. I've got a bit more to do, so we'll have a good video at least. So this is one where what you find is that, again, it's a non-linear effect, that as you add people and you change the parallel proportion, it isn't just the same effect. And I think the best one of that is I have another one of these little guides here, and how much improvement do I get by adding more people? And you see, I go through this all the time. Okay, all right. So 1 person. That's great. 1 person. I get no improvement because I haven't added a second person yet. Now, the input, and the only input I have, is the parallel proportional time. So can this team work independently from every other team and deliver itself? Or does it need to integrate and work in tandem with an API team or in tandem with another team, or needs to stop and synchronize and coordinate the integration of its work and so forth? So that's what this parallel proportion is. Now, if I sort of move this up at 80%, you'll sort of see, as we expected, you don't get 4 times improvement at 80% parallelizable work and 20%. And I think 80-20 is about right for what we're doing. But what do you think? How much improvement do you get if I move this up to 1,000 people? So in the chat window, I'm going to force you to go on the record right now. What do your intuition say that if at 80% independence of work, and I'm going to move from 4 people to 1,000 people, what improvement do you think I'm going to get from a throughput perspective in this system?
You will get instantaneous value delivery realization.
All right, yeah, but how many? How many times improvement do you get for 1,000 people?
Can we go negative?
You go, okay, I mean, chaos, that's sure, I understand that, but have a think about it. Just if it was in the perfect world that these people come on board and knew exactly what they were doing and could work 80% independently, which is pretty good, right? 80 is pretty good. No, you're all wusses. Come on.
I can't remember the formula. I'm going to say like 1.5.
5 times, slightly less than 5 times.
5 times, okay.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's good.
No, Donald, showing off.
The answer, right? So, but you'll sort of see that as we move up, even a slightly more impact of it doesn't get dramatically better, even up at 98%, even at 99%. You're still less than 100 times. You're getting less than 10% of that, right? So if you can manage another thing after weapon on your teams, it's making sure your teams can work independently. Because any time that the teams cannot work independent and need to have a dependency on another group or another team, what you're really doing is you're actually reducing the amount of time that team can work and deliver in isolation. And it can be devastating. Talk about a cost value here. If we were paying for 1,000 people, we would have got pretty much the same amount of output if we'd sort of had 150 odd people, right? It's not dramatically, it's not dramatically more than when we come down to even sort of 20 odd people.
Well, you're not even including the cost of the managers to manage those thousands of people.
But we need managers. We can't do it without managers.
Right, but I'm just saying it's exponential in ways that is not clearly visible. It's far worse than this. Is my claim. Yeah,
I agree, but I often see when people are trying to do forecasting and predictability stuff that they start assuming that by adding a second person, I've solved the problem. By having staff liquidity, I've solved the problem, and that is only true as long as those people have some ability to work and deliver independently, and that might require training. It might require sort of cross-skilling them to understand whatever else they often need. But this is the problem of dependencies. Dependencies make it that there is a non-linear ability to forecast what I can do with the people I have, because without understanding how independent those people are, you do not get the ability to sort of flow. Jocko.
Yeah, just clarifying what we mean by independent. Independent doesn't necessarily, at least in my mind, mean they're not coordinating or collaborating with other people. It means that they have the ability to do their work with a limited, relying on other teams.
That's right. I would define it, and you're right, it's tardy language on my part, but I think it's if a person can be blocked completely dead in the water without having to do that collaboration, then they're not really working they're not in the parallelizable proportion of this formula. They're in the serial.
Yeah, it ties into, which maybe we're not going to go down with this idea of fully autonomous teams, which I think is a ridiculous myth, which we won't go down right now, but they're tied together a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm more of I tend to not teach these as a these are lessons more than absolute exact formulas, right? These are, we got to manage arrival rate. We've got to manage sort of some consistent sort of times of doing our work. We've got to make sure that we keep utilization under control. We've got to make sure that the teams and people have the ability to work independently as much as possible. But all these things have to be blended together into this complex sort of adaptive system, which you guys talk about in irregular.
Well, they trigger deeper conversations, right, about actual contextual problems that they're actually seeing on the things. These are, they're going to be triggered in different ways depending on what the context is, but it's a nice, neutral, data-focused kind of way to catalyze those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the premise of Brooks' law, was that the fact that independence doesn't exist within a team.
Yeah, and I'm okay with the team operating as a unit, a parallelizable proportion of its own right. Yes. So I'm not saying that this works at a team as well as an individual level. But I don't think people quite understand that they're having those teams and people as a starting point, enabling them to work as much as possible without blocking each other is critical. And maybe we should spend some time looking at that aspect of it. Again, because what I'm pointing out is that I get brought in to do forecasting, but what I'm trying to do is get them to understand that there are some precursors to being able to be predictable, and they're scoring low on some of these. Tiani?
Yeah, when you talked about having them work together without blocking each other, that just links back to the concept of reducing as many dependencies then as possible to achieve or improve flow or to enable flow. Is that what you're alluding to?
I think so, but I always sort of say of at least the work you want to get done. Remember, go back to the executive sort of saying, I can't guarantee everything will be predictable, but tell me which ones you must have predictability for, right? So I would sort of say dependencies around making sure we can deliver the highest priority work. I think Chris would sort of say the highest cost of delay work first is the right way of approaching it. So I stop short of saying I can get everything predictable or get everything flowing smoothly, and sort of say, tell me what you want flowing smoothly, and go from there. Greg, did I cut you off before?
I was just going to say, because that leads you into sort of the effectiveness of the team. So you can talk about boundaries, boundary spanners and wide bridges as techniques that play into that space.
Yeah. Got it.
To your point, Troy, you also need that sort of bounded applicability conversation, right? That this is, I'm predicting this in this context, under this set of circumstances for this potential period of time. Because we talk about this all the time, right? They take a predictive model and they run it for as long as they possibly can, no matter what contextual changes there are.
Yeah. And while we're sort of on dependencies, I mean, this is the classic one that I have to constantly sort of remind people of what's the impact of dependencies. And people don't sort of understand this stuff, right? Like dependencies is a probability problem, not actual an organizational problem. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if I had one team that I wanted to be predictable to deliver a piece of work, there's an equal chance in delivering on time or early or late. So on time and early is blue and late is orange. Now, this is just a permutation problem, because if I had two teams that had to coordinate to deliver that work, well, now there's both teams delivered on time or early. Team A delivered late, Team B delivered on time. The reverse, Team B delivered on time and Team A delivered late, and Team A and B delivered late. So just with two teams having to work together, my odds of delivering on time are now 1 in 4. And as I sort of move up and up and up and up and up, and I've seen sort of seven sort of dependencies to get a piece of work done from initiation to delivery, your odds of being able to forecast that is 1 in 128. You're 127 times more likely to be late, just because you have that sort of dependencies in that chain of view. So if you can reduce dependencies with the skills liquidity and cross-training and so forth, what you're really doing is increasing your odds of being able to predict when something is going to be done. It's not about sort of knowing for certain. It's still far more likely to deliver late than you are on time in our world of the moment that you have dependencies. But it just grows so fast.
So does that correlate with lead times as well in the same manner?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is it more or less the same laid on top of each other, or is it even more exponentially worse, leading to infinity?
Well, I'll show you that one in a second. That's sort of, well, I can show it now. Are there any questions on this one at all, right? So this is just a straight 1 to the, how do you work this out? It's just 1 to 2 to the n. So, I give you, the formula is pretty simple. Pretty simple. Why didn't I put the formula in? It's because I think it's just 1 to 2 to the power of n. I don't think it warranted putting the formula in, but it's just based on the if you only got seated in a restaurant when everyone arrived, the more people you invite, the more odds there are of not being seated on time because you don't have your whole party present. There you go. Turned it into a food metaphor. Must be getting near lunchtime. All right. Questions, comments on this one? Now, I'll show you where I started. Well, I think I can somewhere here. See? All right. Just hunting around for something I had open, but I don't seem to have open anymore. Let me turn that one off. No. All right, we'll go to this one. So where I started was a set of work of trying to understand cycle time and lead time, of how cycle time and lead time becomes a probability distribution. And I just have one more search for it here.
You may want to slide your chat thing out of the way to the side if you're going to be.
Okay, they never used to show up. I never.
Yeah. I noticed that. Yeah.
Oh, here we go. It is here. It's just got a weird name. So I started off with this paper, The Economic Impact of Software Development Process Choice on Cycle Time. And, cut a long story short, what I really tried to do here in 10 pages was understand out of the history of cycle time. So there was a lot of cycle time distributions which followed this distribution shape. So I did some analysis as to which probability distributions could fit. And you'll sort of see here is I sort of said, what are the potential candidates? Gamma, Weibull, Rayleigh, log normal. And, what I come up with was, it could be any of them. And I sort of said, my guess is it should be Weibull. And of course, being an industry, just like Tim Mitchell sort of said, once I said the word Weibull, it became common knowledge that probability distributions follow the Weibull distribution. That's not true. This is the only reference you will find to this fact is me. Everyone else, like Stewart and Deming and everyone like that, they don't say it's sort of Weibull. They went to a different aspect of it. So what I tried to do was understand why this is the case. So again, at one conference, I presented this chart here and sort of said, see that green one? It looks best, doesn't it? And the green one is, it's Weibull. So I'd say it possibly Weibull. And then there's now trainers. I say the Weibull distribution is a good choice, but it's a guess. It had.
See what you've done, Troy. See what you've done.
Yeah, right. And
look
that's
what
exactly
you've done.
What happened,
well,
right?
I just think he's a trendsetter. He's a trendsetter and a thought leader.
There you go. Thought leader.
But it's built into, like, I know there's a whole heap of training now where they make people work this stuff out, and it's simply not proved by anyone else. So this paper was sort of trying to work out how wrong could I be. And, what I sort of had to do was understand the physics of how this cycle time distribution could form. And the way I did that was I wrote a software product that simulated Kanban systems. Talk about, give a carpenter a saw or a surgeon a knife, and they will sort of do it. I wrote some software to do the simulations to try and understand what causes these shapes. And then I went and did a historical analysis and looked at how cycle time in the 1970s and 90s to the 2000s to the 2010s changed. And what I found was that, there is an increasing chance that it probably is Weeble based on all of these three styles of distributions can be formed using a known probability distribution called the Weeble distribution. But what changed was there was is that there's different reasons why. And I had a shot at sort of saying, what are the traits that mean out of the two inputs to that probability distribution? You don't need to remember any of this. I'm just giving you some background here. What out of the two input distributions, what are the traits of the process and the types of work you're working on that cause that to occur? And does that match the way we work it out? And essentially it does, because on one of them, we got small, unique work items, medium WIP, few external impediments, dependencies, and fair predictability. And the other side, we have large work items, large work in progress, many external dependencies, and poor predictability. And it turns out that pretty much matches the people who choose to use Kanban and Lean, or the people who choose to use Scrum or SAFe. And so I may well be onto it, but I can't really teach people this stuff. So I sort of, how do I get the point across of why that process of the different style and types of work mean that you should probably choose a different process based on what you know? So I went for a process of trying to teach people using traffic lights. And what is different to software development, product development than the normal world? Now, we see a lot of bell curve distributions in the world, and what they form is it's the sum of unique, independently distributed things together. So if everything had plus or minus variance on it, like, a coin has a 50-50 chance of being heads or tail, and we toss a coin, but that's too simple. Rolling a six-sided die, every side has the equal chance, but as we roll it, and if we sum two different dice together, what we're going to see is it's going to form a normal distribution, averaging out to 7. And there's a lot of reasons. So when you sum together things with the same variance, you get a bell curve. But we don't get bell curves. We get these different sort of distributions of either exponential distribution or these sort of skewed distributions, but we don't get bell curves. And why is that the case? It's because there's an amount of work we know we have to do. And then what gets added to that time is n number of ways that work can be delayed. And in this case, what I'm sort of saying is our delays are just traffic lights. So there's the first chance, second traffic light, first traffic light, second traffic light, third traffic light, fourth traffic light, fifth traffic light. And what I give you over here is the ability to, lost control of my mouse there for a second, is that if I put 100 cars on a road, and if they get all green lights, it takes them 10 minutes to travel that road. If they get stopped at the red light, they get a 2-minute delay. What's the chance they get stopped at the first traffic light, the second traffic light, the third traffic light, the fourth traffic light, or the fifth traffic light? And what you will sort of see is that we end up forming our distribution curve. If you plot your cycle time distributions of your process, it will form this shape. And that's because built into the cycle time and lead time is an amount of work that has to be done, plus a probability of delay, of different types of delay, that sum at or above 100%. Because if I take some of these out, you'll sort of see we get down to being more exponentially distributed as we get down to just 2 or 3 delays, which makes sense, right? So our automated processes like operations teams and help desk tickets, the person getting it pretty much can fix it without requiring help from other people. But as you start increasing the number of ways work can be delayed, or the amount of probability of that delay, what happens is you start shifting the mode, the peaks to the right with these sort of long tails. So if we want to improve the process the most, what we really need to focus on is decreasing the odds of delays occurring. Because what that does is put more items back in the lowest distribution bucket of the histogram and improving the process the most. Because if we have a high number of things with a lower cycle time, we actually make better improvement. So I don't hear people talking about managing the probability of blockers or delays. When we do on dependencies, as Diana sort of said there before, can we just remove dependencies completely? Well, yeah, we can. And if we do that, absolutely, we reduce everything back to being the fastest time possible, exactly 10 delays. But if we start sort of increasing the odds of requiring another team to work with us, and maybe the odds of not having a tester available, and maybe the odds of not having the production environment sort of ready, and the odds of needing the legal team to finish an agreement, or the odds of having a performance problem, what happens is we get many more items out here on the 12, 14, 16, and 18-minute delays. Jocko.
Yeah, I don't know if this is cool. I don't know if this throws a monkey wrench in it or in the complex world, there's a lot of unknown or unknowables, which could on a chart like this be represented as a yellow light. In other words, when some people see a yellow light, they gun it. Other people, if they even see that it's about to turn yellow, will stop. And everything in between, right? Some people just ignore it. That's an unknowable in advance kind of thing, which is when we're operating in complex systems. This can help guide us and all of that kind of stuff, but there's still a variable percentage of unknowable work. It's dependent on the context and the temporality where you are at a given time. What's the environment you're operating? All of that kind of stuff. So the yellow lights, it'd be interesting to see what that would look like.
So I guess the yellow lights would just be another one where on the way to sort of saying, is it red or is it green? We have a probability in the center there that sort of says 20% of those people seeing amber will stop and 80% will go. It's just the way I drive. My wife's from Boston, it's 100% of people would go. But you know, the point is that, at the end of the day, this is just a
that's the interesting thing is like in Boston, the numbers are going to be different than it's going to be in Japan, right? Where you get 100% compliance and everything in between.
Everything in between. But this stuff also was covered back in the 70s in this metrics and software engineering book. They used a different distribution. They used a Rayleigh distribution. But I think that I think it's Weeble because the same formula takes all of the different sort of worlds. So when I go into organizations, the first thing I look at is I grab the cycle times. I come up with a distribution shape. You know, what does it look like? And what it is I see if it looks like this in the blue side, then they really sort of have dependencies and sprint-based stuff. And I look at sort of managing dependencies and managing impediments. If I go into an organization and it looks like sort of these four, I know that they're probably more likely to be having, they're more likely to get value out of automating and task efficiency and using Kanban or lean sort of processes to improve. But if you try and use these techniques as sprints, when this is the sort of nature of the work, you get homicides. And if you try and do the opposite, if you like this, and then you try and use Kanban on the side, because you're constantly blocked, everything just sits idle with blocked stickies on it anyway, right? It doesn't really move anywhere. So I think there is more guidance we can give our industry on. It's okay not to just choose one process. It's to understand that the nature and the type of the work and the dependencies that you have is different. So inside organizations, I don't think that there should just be one process selected. It shouldn't be a unified process. They should be able to think about it and understand it a little bit more, if that makes any sense at all. So this is dated, but it's
Troy, my question would be: is how much traction do you get with the traffic light simulation?
I think what it helps people understand is that there's value in moving a higher percentage of the things to the left and to removing this tail, because some of these out here are out on the tail, and that's where they get frustrated, because I'm okay with things being out on the tail as long as they were low urgency, low cost of delay work. So I tend to sort of say, out of those items which were in this lower buckets out here, how many of those were critical? And if that's critical, then I sort of say, you got to get that stuff. You got to make that stuff skip all these traffic lights. Give them a siren, give them a red light, give them permission to break the rules to get production outages done, and that sort of stuff. So I think, again, I haven't had a lot of traction with it, but I do think that it's the starting point for people to understand that that managing delays and shortening the probability of them has a huge dollar value benefit should they choose to employ it.
Yeah, it's not directly related, but I was wondering if you looked at Kelvin's dice simulator for drum buffer rope. What he's doing is he's using that to highlight the variability of tasks. Compromise the process and lead to delay.
Yeah, and that's a good starting point of it. Where I'm trying to get these executives to is to realize that, first step is make them realize that work spends a lot more time idle than moving. So if you want it moving, then you've got to make sure that you focus on it somehow and create focus on it somehow. So have some way of expressing urgency clearly, expressing strategy clearly would be a good starting point. And then make sure that you understand what is impeding that highest priority work getting done. Start managing what you're blocking on, or what skills are causing that to be in delay. And if you do that, then all I can guarantee you is that at least the highest priority, most urgent work would become more predictable and in the lower cycle times than the higher stuff. So I don't care if it takes a long time. I care what's in these high ends, not that these high ends exist. I care that there's really critical work out there.
I use the Steve Jobs story, Joko. I use the Steve Jobs story basically about letting his managers highlight their priorities and then crossing out all but the top three.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way of doing it as well. I don't think I've got much else I want to cover, really.
Well, I wanted to use that as a segue real quick to something we were talking about earlier before we all hopped on the call, which is when we're talking about the variability, and there's variability all over the place. You just got to go looking for it. What is some of the challenge that I see a lot of people doing is using averages. The pros and cons of that, just because the average is easy, it's easy to understand, it's easy to pull, and as you know, data that's easy to pull is usually, but it can be very misleading and problematic because it doesn't tell you the range. It's just, any comments on the use of averages?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I got to share again one more time. I mean, when we're sort of doing forecasting and we're sort of doing, this is another, sorry, one small side story until I get to it. Just another thing, I sort of said the industry latched onto Weevil because I said it once. But when I was building the spreadsheet, which does a Monte Carlo forecast, don't worry about what that is for the moment, but I had this big chart over here, because I'm 0, 5, 10%, 15%, 25, 34, 50%, whatever. And I could sort of come up here and I always sort of said, well, okay, below 50%, I'm going to make red or pink. I don't know what the pastel color is, but you bear with me with the colors, right? And then what I did was I sort of said, well, maybe 50% of this should be. And I went up to there and I made that yellow and the top green. And it just looked odd. So what I did was I did it 2/3, 1/3. So I made this up to 80% and I made everything above that green. Now trainers now teach that 85% likelihood has some magical properties, that it's absolutely sort of 85%. So you'll see tools specify everything to 85% and forecasting things 85%. It's just made up to make this look good. 85% was, if you Google it, you won't find a reference to it other than, they use it for traffic lights, and 85% of the traffic's clear. Otherwise,
say 80-20, just like we were talking about earlier with utilization.
Yeah, right. I mean,
right? What could people accept? And you give them that number as a starting point, right?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, if I'd actually done that, the industry would have said that 80% had some magical properties. So what I'm frustrated about in our industry is that just a cosmetic issue set the folklore for what we sort of have, right? Now, what I was going to say is that if you're projecting out averages, you're going to end up giving a date which is around about the 50th percentile. Errors compensate, and anyway, even though it's not symmetrical, that's roughly what it's going to be. So you would, that's okay. That actually has a 50% chance of hitting or missing. That's absolutely a valid answer. But what going down that extra mile of adding a little bit of uncertainty in it does is it gives us this low and the high range. It gives us this distribution shape. So even though 50% is absolutely the most likely, so go ahead and use average. It won't give you the wrong answer. What it won't give you is what the risk is and how long that risk is of being late, given how not everything goes perfectly according to plan. So I'm okay with doing math on averages and predicting averages isn't going to give you an incorrect result, but it's pretty simple to give yourself more information to allow you to opt into a higher number should the consequences be high enough. And, what's the consequence high enough? Leaving for the hospital during childbirth, having heart surgery. I want better than average odds of coming out alive, right? There are plenty of things that we want in life more certain. So if you're projecting out average and the consequences are low, you're doing a good job because you're not wasting your time adding silly, unnecessary complexity to something that doesn't need it. But if you're in a domain where being late has huge consequences, then you're breaking the rules. You need to do better. And I find in our world, projecting out a distribution is on average is best practice. But what that's doing is it means that half the time, and if everything goes right, half the time we're going to appear to deliver late, and we burn a lot of political capital by doing that. So I think there's benefit in using the tools which give you an understanding of worser cases than average. Does that answer your question?
But your assumption there is that you've got a Gaussian distribution, so your worst case should be twice.
For the average, I'm assuming, for throughput. And throughput, believe it or not, often does tend to be sort of Gaussian in input. So if you're basing it on throughput, you're on safe ground. If you're basing it on cycle time, you're on unsafe ground.
Yeah.
But for throughput, I think you're pretty safe. This is a spreadsheet. It's just used as formulas. There's no code, and it does not assume any distribution. It just resamples between. If you use historical data, then it's going to resample what you put in, and you only need sort of 7 odd sort of throughput numbers, and to sort of start getting a vivid distribution. So any more than 7, then you're refining the heights of these bars, but you're not exploring the extremes. So I see the value of not using average, using actual historical data as telling me what the worst case could be. So I understand the consequences of and the benefit of making sure this does not occur. And that's what you can't do if you just use simple sort of average regression and analysis.
Well, that might be my problem with averages has always been isn't the 50% the absolute least amount of information you could possibly have?
Yeah.
Right. So that's what people are moving that number towards, is that doesn't tell you anything. At least if it's 80% failure, to make an adjustment because you have information. At 50%, you have no information. And that's what usually equates to the average. But anyways.
Well, I think even if you're going to track the average, let's track the average over time to see how it's drifting and changing. Because it's what's happening here is what we're really trying to spot, what Deming was trying to spot and Stewart and all of those ones. Look, I'm dropping names now. I knew none of them, but they were what they were really looking for was the distribution was moving. They weren't looking for any particular value. They were sort of saying that the distribution is shifting. So I find that, you know, plotting the average and watching it change tells you whether you're drifting up or drifting down. So you know, horses for courses. But if you
the average will lead to a target, I can almost guarantee it.
Yeah, there's that as well. Yeah. Not sure. Well, I don't know. There's one more thing I could cover, and this is more. I'll do it quickly, but this is how I teach some of that stuff. What you just sort of said, at the average will become a target. Yeah, and I just sort of tend to introduce this whenever I start to talk about data and charts is these simple rules. Very simple. It'll take me 5 minutes to do. You know, like there's plenty of ways that charts and data, the moment that you start showing data, you know, you're going to be the messenger that's giving bad news. And sometimes people want to mislead with the data, and sometimes the data drives adverse behavior. These are all things that are going to happen the moment you start showing data. So what are some basic ground rules that if these can't be true in an organization, then don't continue an engagement? And, you know, that's the first job. The moment that we start showing data is that, you know, we don't want it to cause and make things worse than make things better. And sometimes we can do that. So here's a classic one of a company which had this in the lunchroom. They counted the number of bugs that were allocated to an individual developer. And they look, there's Greg. They listed it from naughty to nice on in the lunchroom. So I mean, can you think of the consequences that this caused? What did this cause in this organization?
Nothing good.
Well, no one shipped anything because they sort of didn't want to be on that naughty list.
Yeah.
So they tested, or they increased the number of sticky notes used, because rather than logging it, they put a sticky note on your monitor if they liked you. They logged it twice using different grammar if they disliked you. I mean, what we lost was the ability to understand how many defects there were in this code base. All right, so that's the first thing that you want to do. The moment that data can even vicariously embarrass someone, you're going to lose data. So if it's allocated to an individual, or if my name was on the top of that list, I would sort of put up the shame curtains. I would not, I think that this is just going to cause loss of data. And some guy said to me, one VP sort of said, your coaches are always for the people's feelings. I said, they don't give a stuff about the people's feelings. The data's lost. We don't have any clue how many defects there are in the system at the moment because everyone's too scared to log them. So, you know, you gotta find a level of displaying data that allows people to be in it together.
Yeah, just a real side note on that. It's an incredibly rational thing to do, is to hide your work under that scenario. So it's not just fluffy feeling kind of stuff. It's pure rational. It's smart to hide your work under those conditions, and that's what the system is setting. It's encouraging that kind of behavior.
He was more autistic than me. What can I say? So this is the other one that we want to go ahead about, is that they don't have lonely numbers. And what's a lonely number? Well, here we go. We have a value here at the throughput by team, or the cycle time by team, bad at the bottom, good at the top. Which team gets the nasty email? Who do I send the nasty email to? I send it to the gray circle at the top, because I send them congratulations, and the green square, I send them, your performance needs to improve. You in the bottom 10%. I need to lay you off. Please go and work for someone else.
I've seen the emails sent to the gray one before, interestingly enough. You're going too fast. You're making us look bad.
It's making us all look bad. So the problem is, without understanding where they were and where they are now, you don't get the story about that which team should get the improve yourself email. Well, it should have been the gray circle, because they're the ones which are struggling to maintain the current performance that they were doing. And it even gets worse, right? So the green team, which would have got the original email, they might have just formed. They weren't even around 2 months ago, 3 months ago. So if you're just making a decision, or giving advice to just the most recent number that you see, you will be in error most of the time, because it's the trajectory.
And those gray boxes may be causing the green boxes poor performance, because now they're battling with each other.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, sure, Donald. So, I mean, that's the point is, on this one here, it's that the moment that you're not operating and understanding and interpreting data based on a trend, you're likely making a mistake. You're getting poor insights, and you're almost causing a vanity number to go up. And moving a single number is really easy. Moving multiple aren't. So if there's any charts that show a single number of value, and if you can ask yourself, would knowing what this number was last month change my interpretation, then you must not show just the latest number. You must not report it. You must always show that number as a trend. And then you got to make sure that people don't jump to conclusions based on just the most recent value. Even if you show a trend, oh, but look, they're sort of at the highest point. They're better than every other team. We don't need to do anything. No, but you will next month. So if there's any predictive nature in the data you're showing, then you've got to show it as a trend. The next one, comparing in context. So, we make an art form of setting a reference line. All right, which work items are bad? We throw in a reference line and sort of saying above the line is bad, below the line is good. And then we sort of say, oh, God, we're data geniuses. God, we're gurus. The problem is if I then highlighted by color coding what's the automated work and what's the manual work, you'll sort of see that it just takes us longer to do manual work than automated work. So whereas we would have gone and researched all the reasons and causes that we had those high cycle times, it doesn't make sense because they each should have their own reference line of what's unusual for like. In other words, what is unusual for manual work and what is unusual for automated work. And we make an art form of this because all of our tools build in these scatter plots where they don't categorize items. And what do we categorize them by? Well, I mean, maybe those high cycle time things are really high value things, and we're really glad that we did them. There's nothing to learn from it. It's just that it has a trait which takes us longer to do, but we're glad to spend that time. So you can't compare watermelons and apples on the same chart, but we do. And we do all the time. So what we've got to try and do is think about, if I'm going to show multiple things on the same chart, and I'm going to want to try and distinguish unusual from usual on that chart, then we might be better off putting them on separate charts, or we might be better off color coding them so that we don't mislead everyone into sort of saying, that is a really, all these apples are bad. They're all too small. Send them all back. No, they're actually large for apples. They're just small for watermelons. And we've got to find a way of making sure that we segment comparable types and we only show them together. And I see this with like the same thing in forecasting. We have some features which are massively complex and brand new and innovative and earth-shattering and groundbreaking. And we belt people up because, why can't you estimate how long this thing's going to take? Well, it's not like resetting passwords, which is the other stuff on the same chart, right? So there are some teams which will and should be predictable, and there are some teams and work which shouldn't be predictable, and we should celebrate. And the problem is we just look for these very simple ways of spotting anomalies in our industry, and we need to help people find anomalies easier. And the Deming and the Stewart people with the systems and the common cause and special cause variation, that was the fight they were fighting. They were fighting that all variation was seen as sort of bad and had signal, and that wasn't the case. That there was some signal which was more signal, and they wanted to find it so they could work on it. But we are retreading history in all of this stuff here and our industry. So is having targets bad? Well, no, not necessarily, because if you don't give people a target, they'll create their own one anyway. And there's a really sort of large number of people who finish community marathons slightly under 4 hours. I mean, it's not like they wouldn't have got under 3 hours, but if they would have been 4 hours and 1 minute or 4 hours and 2 minutes, they absolutely pushed a little bit harder to hit the 4 hour target because they felt some sense of achievement in it. So if you don't set a target, people are going to set their own. If you don't set a target, then someone with less information than you do is going to set a target. And understand that it's not the target that's wrong, it's the punishment of not hitting a target that's wrong. So it should be a guiding line in the sand, but it should not be there shouldn't be consequences for missing it. There should just be consequences for setting it without data or information, if that makes sense at all. So I'm not against targets. I'm just against sort of what's benefit of a target is for finding something that is an anomaly, something unexpected. It's probably that our expectation was wrong, not that what actually happened was wrong. What actually happened was exactly what had to happen. So what I'm looking at is, why did we expect it to happen sooner? And it's normally because of the delays, dependencies, utilization, all those other aspects of it.
Well, I'll jump in real quick on, I think targets are bad, but not in and of themselves, not for the reason why people think. I think they're bad is because the target means different things to different people at different levels of the organization. It's a language thing. And in general, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make progress towards that target rather than, but that's on the lower levels. That's what everybody's doing. On the upper levels, you either hit it or you don't. And that last 1% to hit your target may cost you several $1 million.
Yeah.
Or the first 40% only cost you $100,000. And they will continue to burn money on that 1% because they haven't hit their target and you're a failure. Or actually, it made way more sense to quit earlier. So what are you trending towards to hit that? So again, the problem is the word target more than the actual use of it.
Got it. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I could probably do some better thinking about what to set there. I sort of tend to use I use the word expectation a lot. So for a forecast, I sort of talk about our expectation is this, and I'm using that as a way of understanding and helping people cut scope earlier, and rather than sort of not, rather than setting it as a target. So yeah, I could do more there.
There's a lot to be done around the language is so entrenched inside most organizations, right? And you're trying to talk about these things in a language they understand, but also change the way they think about what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so here's what I know. I have another sort of spreadsheet, and these are all free, so there's nothing sort of being sold here. But what I find is that communicating a multicolor just based on the binary, that's going to make it, that's going to make it, this isn't. It's the first no that causes the most discussion, because what they'll say is, oh, we need feature 3. And I'll sort of say, do you need all of feature 3? And they'll sort of say, well, probably not, So we need the first sort of between 3 and 5 stories of feature 3. Okay, now we know that the rest of feature 3, 3B is down here, and that's going to be between 10 and 15 sort of stories in its own right? So until there's a line in the sand, a reference, not a target, but if they don't have a target, I make them put a target date in about when they want something delivered. But it's the first no, which is what I'm trying to get them to understand what they need to do to avoid that no. And that might have been splitting it, or it might have been doing it first and doing this one third, right? So there were multiple ways of getting feature 3, but it's about having that discussion at the start, not at the end when everyone's disappointed and angry that I'm, maybe it should be the last yes. Yeah, sure. I mean, that same sort of thing. But no, I mean, people, pointy head, white, elderly, white, male, cisgendered people just want to, what aren't I getting, and how do I build up to get it, and who do I make work longer hours? So there's a lot of we're so focused on negativity in our sort of world.
Well, there's hardly any of them in the lounge, Chris, Troy. So I think we're safe. No. I mean,
they're becoming rarer. But that's sort of how I sort of tend to think about targets. So I think if people will have one, if I don't give them one, and what I'm really trying to get them to with a target is to understand, is to feel loss earlier, if that makes sense, Jocko. I want them to feel the pain, why there's not as much invested in pride and ego in making it become true. So that's the managing the pride and ego, which is the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, as a manager, one of the things you have to, it's really about this. If I'm setting a target, I have to be aware of how easy it is to gain that target, and what kind of behavior am I reinforcing by setting this particular target.
Yes, that's right. And what I'm trying to do with the forecasting side with the targets is, if they don't give me one, I'll set it so that half the things miss, to make sure that they start having to make better trade-off decisions about what they are going to get. So, so I will always put something in to force the discussion about what they might miss, given that only half of things get done anyway, right?
That's what I meant by the last yes. Is that's the transition period, right? And there's interesting stuff going on in either side of that line.
And if they're using average now, then I'm absolutely certain that they're going to they're going to miss half of it anyway. So I'm sort of saying, just be explicit about which half. That's my only input to them on the forecasting side, is about being explicit about what you are going to get. Don't obsess over what you're not going to get.
Okay. Greg, did you have something? You've unmuted yourself, or?
No, well, I've talked long enough.
You just.
I don't know whether this is the type of content you wanted, so I just sort of threw stuff out there that you.
Hey, there were some formulas up. I'm happy. But I'd like to ask, are there any more questions? Anybody have anything they want to ask Troy, challenge Troy about? Pay respects, whatever you'd like to do. And if there aren't any, then Troy, I respect in the sense of, you. Thank you so much for all of this.
I'm not dead yet.
I wasn't using it in that context. Damn it. So we got the first swearing of the meetup out of the way. Troy, we'd like to thank you so much. And we'd also like to ask you, where can people, you mentioned that you have all these free assets and spreadsheets and papers and things. Where can people find your work?
Okay. I put in the chat window.
Yeah.
If you go to perkinsobjective.com, there's a resources link on the top, which goes to a GitHub account, which is my top drawer of spreadsheets. Good luck. But it's got articles and decks and stuff like that. Predictability at scale.com. You'll sort of see where I've taken a lot of these practices, and with Chris Heffley, we're trying to put them into a tool so that you don't need to know the math, but you're going to live out the spirit of managing all the dependencies and managing that skills, liquidities, that sort of stuff. So we're trying to turn that into that world. And if you want to just contact me, which I'm always sort of there.
Okay, I'm just checking to see if the focused objective link works.
Oh, no, because I've misspelt it.
Yeah, I was worried about that. So it's actually focusedobjective.com.
Yeah, that'll work.
Yep.
Yeah, there it is.
We'll put these all in the show notes as well.
Yeah, either way, I'm not hard to find. Just Google sort of weird Australian guy who likes math.
And and what are you
There's
working
only
on
one, by the way.
Yeah,
that's right.
He's the only one. We got the unicorn. And so what are you working on these days? Do you have anything exciting coming up, or?
It's really, if you go to predictability at scale, and you'll see the stuff around managing blockers and managing dependencies and managing start skills, and sort of understanding urgency and prioritization based on strategy. So something small, but but you can see how I got there, right? Like, I understand that cycle time is about managing the reasons work isn't flowing and being blocked. So, part of it is that side of managing the blockers and urgency and getting the right things unblocked. And then there's, why were they blocked? Well, we didn't have enough people to do that sort of work. So there's a set of skills that are required on the teams in order to have the liquidity to deliver that work, right? So you see where we're heading there. And which skills are needed? Well, that depends on the strategy, right? If our strategy is to move more to the cloud, then let's develop the skills in the cloud domain in anticipation of requiring and needing that work. So you can see how the three really work together to get that cycle time distribution shifted to the left, increase the odds, make sure the right things are flowing and the right things are idle. And you do that, then you become predictable at scale.
Maybe we'll have you back to talk about the blocker stuff in the future, because there's a whole lot to talk about there. There's a lot more going on than most people think there is.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you have an open invitation, because I think the audience found this to be a really, really rich conversation. And I know I did. Yes, Donald. Yes. I mean, we are so grateful that you took time to come and talk to the group. As I say, you're welcome anytime. And I encourage everyone to seek out Chris's work, Troy's work, because it is really helpful when you're thinking about or trying to think about the metrics that you're faced with every day. So once again, thank you so much, Troy, and I hope we see you again soon.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Yeah.